Thank you, Mr Chair. It's always an honour to follow on from that member Paul Quinn, who apparently overnight has spoken to every person in New Zealand and is testament to the old adage that ignorance never sleeps. And I want to say to Mr Quinn, he talked about Labour's envy tax in 1999 when we raised the top tax threshold. Mr Quinn, at least we went out on the election campaign and were honest about what we were going to do. Your party, Mr Quinn, the National Party, went out on the election campaign and promised that you would not increase GST. Labour in 1999 did exactly what we promised. We didn't hide anything on the election campaign, and I actually think that that is an important distinction. Mr Quinn might not think so. He might think it's okay to say one thing to the voters of New Zealand before the election and then do the exact opposite afterwards, which is say that they weren't going to increase GST before the election and then increase it afterwards. But the people of New Zealand will see that for what it is, which is a tax swindle, Mr Quinn. And Mr Quinn referred to the close-up poll last night, where he said 80% of people are for this budget. And I want to tell Mr Quinn that's because the people who are opposed to it couldn't afford 75 cents a text to phone in like his rich mates can. Like the National Party Research Unit sending emails around saying, text in now, make sure you say you're for the budget. Well, Mr Quinn, thanks to the budget of the National Party that was passed, or that was put up yesterday, most people cannot afford 75 cents for a text to phone in and say that they like the National Party budget. And I would suggest that he stop listening to unscientific polls and actually go out and talk to people. He stood in Hutt South, I think. I'm not sure, I can't remember how well he did, but he should go out and talk to people in that electorate. Mr Quinn, why don't you go out and talk to people rather than reading the Dominion Post? Why don't you actually go and talk to people? Go and ask those families who are going to have their early childhood education subsidies cut whether or not they think it was a good budget. Go and talk to those people who are having their home help services cut about whether they think this was a good budget. Go and talk to those schools that are having their budgets cut and ask them if they think that this is a good budget, Mr Quinn. Mr Chair, this is a tax swindle, this taxation budget measures bill, and part one is one of the worst parts of this tax swindle because it locks into place the broken promises of the National-led government. They promised there wouldn't be an increase in GST, as I said. Well, Mr Tremaine thinks this is boring. But the fact is, Mr Tremaine went out on the campaign trail and promised that he would not increase GST. Promised. Is this not a broken promise, Chris Tremaine? Is this a broken promise? It's not a broken promise. Apparently looking down the barrel of the TV camera and saying, I will not increase GST, and then increasing GST is not a broken promise, according to the national government. Well, that explains a lot in this budget. Because how is this being paid for? Well, this is being paid for by borrowing for tax cuts, which was the other thing that National promised when they were in opposition that they would not do. Well, the National government now has to borrow $500 million a year to pay for these unaffordable tax cuts for the people who funded them during the election campaign. The people who funded them during the election campaign are the people who get the biggest benefit from part one of this piece of legislation, Mr Chair. And I want to talk about another part of this part one of the bill, and that's the removal of 20% depreciation loading on new plant and equipment for assets purchased after budget day. Because this has been a government that is terrible for innovation. This has been a government that has taken away everything that Labour did when we were in government, brought back less than half of what we did and proclaimed it to be a great day for science, a great day for research and development and a great day for innovation. And then lo and behold in the budget we get another whack on innovation. Something else which is going to stop our most innovative companies from being able to get ahead and being able to compete in this crucial area. And this really shows how hollow the National Party's words are when it comes to supporting innovative businesses. I mean, the fact that they put Wayne Mapp in charge of the portfolio is one thing. This is a man who, after the election, went out and kept saying to people, I never wanted the portfolio. I never wanted the portfolio. The political correctness eradicator has also become the innovation eradicator in this government, because how you can stand up with a straight face and say that this is a government that supports R&D, when the measures that have been lauded and brought back in this budget, and this is one part of this budget, are less than half what Labour put in place. when we were in government. Mr Chair, Mr Chair, Mr Chair.
Honourable Marion Street.
Thank you, Mr Chair. I wish to speak to part one of this bill, and there's only one bit that I wish to speak to, Mr Chair, and it is the increase in GST. And I'd like to unpack that a little bit insofar as the way it is going to impact on students. Because it seems to me, Mr Chair, that in this budget, tertiary education is the big loser. Tertiary education across the board is the big loser. And it doesn't matter how the government chooses to spin this, let's have a look at some of the facts and the detail. Not only is there going to be a GST increase, which every student will feel on their rent, their food, their books, but in addition to that, despite any compensation, about which we have heard nothing, we've not heard any specifics, but let's assume it is the same compensation that the government